The second force that shapes the truth is what the public wants, because the media are in the business of selling a commodity called news. And by delivering what the public want, they improve their prospects of making a profit. Generally speaking, sport dominates, sex comes second, and political misconduct is a close third. A story about a politician bribing a sports star for sexual favours will dominate page 1 through to 6, and the outbreak of World War III will be on page 7.
Understanding our audience involves an understanding of what they want and expect from the media. The aim of this group was to figure out whether or not those without a 4-year degree view the media differently than those with a degree. Much of our secondary research dealt with the media being biased.
So what you're saying is that journalists at the big newspapers and big networks, your former colleagues at CBS, in this campaign, they weren't really journalists anymore. They were political activists. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that is what I'm saying. I'm saying they crossed the line from media bias to media activism.
According to our secondary research, the general public's perspective of media alienates about 18% of our target audience. It was our goal to point out whether or not this was a substantial difference based on education level. Based on our qualitative research, our first hypothesis was that people with degrees think that media is more biased than people without 4-year degrees. Although it's broadly defined, we applied people's satisfaction with the media to this topic. Given that the topic of media bias has political connotations, it worked out that our survey was somewhat reflecting the most recent election, with a slight edge going to conservatives and Republicans over liberal Democrats. We used our survey to collect data on how satisfied people are with national, local, and individual journalists. Across the board, the majority of people felt a little to somewhat satisfied with the media. When we look at it graphically, we can see the charts all look pretty similar when it comes to national news, local news, and individual journalists. The data in the survey affirms the fact that people aren't completely satisfied with the media, but the fact that both the colleged and uncolleged are so statistically similar proves this hypothesis to be null. Therefore, we can't make the claim that college people think that the media is more biased than uncolleged. And that leads us into our second hypothesis. Based on some anecdotal evidence we found during our qualitative research, we found that people with a college degree find the media to be more reliable and take a more active role in collecting different sources.
So the person who I spoke with who did not have a college degree, she kind of gave me some insight onto what she thought. She didn't really trust the media in her own hometown, like her local newspaper or local television news, because she thought they were too attacking towards the politicians. She instead preferred just talking to her neighbors, her friends, and people like that to try to gauge what's going on in her local community.
So to compare the reliability of these different types of sources, we divided our data into 3 categories: local and national journalism, and community. National journalism included major newspapers, cable and network television, radio, and online news sites. Local journalism included small papers, local television, radio, and blogs. Community consisted of a broadly defined term referring to peers, which could include anything from social networking to personal interaction. On a national level, about 60% of people tend to be somewhat satisfied with the news, with about 5% not at all satisfied. The overall charts with the people without degrees, the chart looks largely similar, with a majority of about 60% of people feeling somewhat satisfied with the national media coverage. When we get to the local level, we see about 60% of people are somewhat trusting of traditional local outlets. This is the same for people without a degree. However, blogs are not considered particularly reliable, according to this survey, with 35% of the total saying they do not trust blogs whatsoever. It's also worth noting that no one with a college degree thought that blogs were very reliable. Finally, we can compare this to how much people trust their friends and relatives in relation to traditional news sources. People with degrees are particularly skeptical of their friends and peers, with only one person saying they think their friends are very reliable. People without a degree were more spread out, but still about 80% of people thought that their friends were a little to somewhat reliable, which was about the same as the college people. Comparing these numbers together, we once again find that there isn't a significant difference between people with and without degrees in terms of how reliable they find media outlets. This proves our second hypothesis to be null as well. Despite our group's number crunching, we ended up with the survey not quite giving us the closure for all the questions that we'd come up with. Our secondary and qualitative research brought up some interesting hypotheses that the project failed to prove, but also to disprove.
The people who I interviewed who said that they were somewhat trusting of media said that they only used one, maybe two sources, which was something that we didn't really go over in our survey.
While the survey did ask how often they watched television or read a newspaper, the survey did not ask how many different stations or different websites they visited. They may only go online once a week but get caught up on several different websites, or they may be on every day, only viewing the same one. Unfortunately, this question was left off the survey for time reasons, but if we could have had a question that addressed what news channels they watched or websites they visited, it would have gone a long way towards telling us whether or not people without a college degree approach the news more passively than people with a degree. Our interview subjects hinted towards proving that hypothesis correct, but further surveying would be necessary to actually prove it.
There's an overall vagueness in this whole project that sort of, I think, kept us from figuring out exactly why people would answer on a survey like the one we created. They don't trust individual journalists. Not a very personal survey, but it's consistent. And we do know now that there isn't a whole lot of difference between people who have a bachelor's degree and people who don't in terms of how they trust individual journalists and, say, their national and local news affiliates. It's pretty consistently wishy-washy.
A lot of the responses to the survey were essentially middle of the road. The wishy-washy answers revealed to us that many people feel neutral about their views on the media, in a way that's just as powerful as if they had chosen very reliable or not at all reliable. It shows that we're currently reaching our audience. They don't think it's perfectly reliable and satisfying, but it could be worse. In conclusion, whether people are fully satisfied or not, journalists across the world create content to help inform the public of current affairs. Our group has found that a person's view on media is not contingent upon their level of education. There's little to no evidence done in this research that proves that the level of education affects the way a person sees the media as a whole. The research has shown that there are lots of different possible views about the media, but factors other than education make up most of the differences. American journalism appears to be accessible and acceptable to all levels of education.